Hello there, welcome back. I'm going to talk today about Napoleon and what would have normally been just a simple review of a film which is out in cinema, which is turned into what the hell is this by, Napoleon being such a weird film. Napoleon is a Ridley Scott's version of the Napoleon Bonaparte story. And it really does feel like, what were they thinking with some of this stuff? I mean, the film has good acting, and it has good sets, good design. The stunts are done properly. There's a lot of professionalism going on, but the script is appalling. The script's something else. So it's ill-considered. It ignores all of the interesting parts of the situation. It goes for basic emotions rather than the complexity of what could be a fascinating situation. So at the heart of it, it's got an interesting idea, but it's all buggered up, but it looks beautiful. In other words, a Ridley Scott film. Ridley Scott's one of those directors who sometimes makes good films, but he tends to make good films when he's got someone else writing the script for him, when the script comes to him rather than him developing it. Because when he develops a script, he's all over it, and he's not a particularly good storyteller, like in the writing part. He's one of those directors who works with the writer draft after draft, but he's not a writer. And the films tend to become like blanded out in the script format, because I've feeling he's much more comfortable in the picture qualities, and he's much less comfortable in the idea area, and that's where it gets sticky. And if you actually see his interviews, he tends to be very dismissive, very arrogant about criticism. He tends to see this film is a lot of people talking about historical inaccuracies or things that are left out that were really important, and he's like, were you there? In other words, don't tell me that I've messed up, I don't want to know. And it's like, it's important to know when you're messed up. It's important to understand where you've gone wrong to try and improve for the future, but Ridley Scott just makes the same mistakes again and again. I have no idea why he's still got films at a large scale produced, beyond the fact that he's very efficient on set. Because he's had like disaster after disaster. He's had an astonishing amount of financial disasters over time. And generally it's a weird situation. I mean, this film does feel like it's half a film. It feels like there's so much missing that was important. So even though there's lots of good scenes in the film, it does feel like half the film's missing. So that becomes the main thing, is like, you start, you stop, you start, you stop. You get some information, and then you think, okay, they're going to elaborate on that, and they don't. And it's like, that was important to understand this guy. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's not important. It's get to the next bit, get to the next thing. That's what it's about. And it becomes unsatisfying, because the film takes as its base the most boring part of Napoleon's life, which was his romance with Josephine, his first wife, and the difficulties of it. Now that's interesting as a subplot. If it's a 2.5 hour film, I don't know, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes towards that would have been fine. And you could have compressed all of that stuff down to that quite easily, because certain things are repeated quite a few times. It's like, I got it first time, I don't need to see this again. Can you give me something that's interesting and it's historically accurate? But it goes on and on about this romance, and how it starts out as her using him, and him being very unsocial, and then a bond slowly forms over time after they make mistakes and have lovers and things, and eventually they do become close, and then his divorce her because she can't give him an heir and things like that. That's interesting, but it's given so much running time. It's like, we don't need this. There's so much more interesting things in Napoleon's life than this. I mean, there's just it's trying a list of what the things they do not show in this film are. It goes on for a while. There's so much here that they do not show. I mean, the start, you don't ever see him in Corsica. ever. So they start on the French Revolution when he sees the execution of Marie Antoinette, which apparently did not happen. Then we see him suddenly turn up as a soldier, as a person who is already in charge of some military, but at a much lower level. And there's a problem on a fort town, and the English have taken it over, and they need this port town taken out for their own defences. So Napoleon goes and does that in about 10 minutes. And in reality, it's a much tougher campaign, but they give it 10 minutes and have a one fight, and it's like, I kind of needed more. Even if you haven't seen the Arrogance one, which this thing took forever and it was brilliant, it's still kind of lacking. A horse gets shot for a cannon, that's the highlight, but after that it becomes a typical action scene. It's not that interesting. And then he slowly builds his way up the political ladder. And by doing with that, I mean basically they cut months out constantly and just show that the post-revolutionary world is backstabbing and dangerous, and you don't ever get a sense of the danger of it. You just have a sense of people making speeches, and it's kind of boring. And this is one of the most interesting, exciting times in history, where a revolution collapsed under its own weight, under its own corruption of the people involved who started the revolution and then try to get everything for themselves. And people saw that, and slowly it devolved back into a centralised leadership pretty quickly, and Napoleon took advantage of that. Isn't that a fascinating thing? That could have been a film in itself. Instead, it's 20 minutes. Then you get Napoleon in Egypt. It ignores completely his massive campaign in Italy, that's where it became a big success, because he gets some success by stopping the riots in Paris. That's where he becomes the leader of the military. That's done in one scene. No build up, no nothing, just one scene. Then they ignore Italy, which would have been a much more interesting subject, and they go to Egypt, and it's like, why are we in Egypt? That's the problem with the film. It just jumps to places, and it's like, and if you don't have any context on Napoleon's life, it's like, why are we here? And even if you do, you're thinking, okay, why did they miss out the really important bit where you don't need Egypt at all if you're doing a cut down version of Napoleon's life. It's not one of the important things. Italy is. Italy is when he became the big leader of France, in the eyes of the people. And then it just keeps on jumping back to his private life with Josephine, rather than all the different changes he's making into literature, how he's changing the system in France, and how he's actually putting laws in. So Napoleon was a very divisive figure. To some, he was this British leader who's trying to conquer the world. To others, he was reforming a system that was broken, and he was changing things in law that would continue after his death, and it would continue the enlightenment of mankind. And he was trying to conquer these other nations and bring these laws in. And the laws went into lots of places he conquered. And even when he was gone, the laws stayed because they were good laws. That's not in the film. In the film, he's just this weird horny guy who is in love with Josephine and likes to attack people. And it's a black comedy. Phoenix is really funny as Napoleon. And his scenes are all terrific. But you're missing, the central driver of the person you're portraying, which is, he wasn't just this figure with some romantic problems with his wife. He was a guy who was actually driven to make changes to France to improve it, cause he came out of the revolution, and was also driven to invade people. He had two different drives, and this film doesn't really get to grips with the kind of brutal force he had, or the things he wanted to improve and things he did improve. So the kind of dual figure Napoleon, was he a monster or was he trying to do good, is gone completely. That's why the French critics hated the film, by the way. It's like the film threw away the dynamic that was an important part of Napoleon to do God knows what. The film ignores the Spanish campaign. Like, they're initially allies with Spain on the build-up to Trafalgar, and eventually they turned against Spain. Spain turned against them. Ignores the British thing till the end, where Britain was a thorn in the side on the sea. Like, they were fighting the British. They invested a lot of money in boats, and then Britain destroyed that in Trafalgar, Battle of Trafalgar, and Napoleon's, ambitions to the sea were pretty much limited, and he had to stick to land. They ignore Americas, where the French Louisiana area was sold to the rest of America. That's ignored. They ignore basically Napoleon focused on Europe, and he lost interest in the colonies because they were rebelling. All that's fascinating stuff, ignored. Just because Napoleon's in love. So basically, the film ignores so much. The film ignores all these things in Europe, where Europe was a very kind of warlike place at the time, and people were attacking Napoleon, and he was attacking them back and trying to take land. And this was the way Europe was at the time. Everyone was trying to get one up on each other and expand their territories, and it was basically the rich doing it and the poor having to go along with it. The film ignores the fact that the French were behind Napoleon for a lot of the time, not just because he won them great victories, it's because he did reforms for them, and they liked Napoleon because he seemed to be on their side in some areas. But in other areas, he was a dictator. He increased education in some ways, but when it came to history, he preferred to teach propaganda. No. Government would never do that now, would they? They would never do that now. He said he had lots of issues, but it was a complicated thing, and the film doesn't get to grip with that. It doesn't even suggest Napoleon should be interested in that. It's just Napoleon who wants wealth for the sake of wealth. That's not Napoleon. That's someone else. That's not Napoleon. He's socially awkward, but that's only part of his thing. He had a reason for doing these things, and then there was social issues at the time which made it important he had to defend himself but also fight, because he had a drive to conquer and to expand his ideas, but he also had to defend himself against other countries. And it was a complicated issue. Like, was he the aggressor? Because they even called Napoleonic War era because of Napoleon. A lot of countries felt that he had to be put down for greater safety for the rest of the countries in Europe. Like, he was viewed as a threat. The film doesn't cover that either. The Spanish thing, we put his brother in power and was fighting against the Spaniards and all the different areas in Spain. So they ran Spain for a bit, then they get pushed back. Not covered. You see his brother early on, and then the brother disappears. So it's so much here that could have been covered. There's like a decade of Napoleon's rule where you really only get like the beginning bit, the bit where he divorces Josephine, and then his disaster in Russia. It's like there's so much missing here that it's like embarrassing. Now there is going to be a 4.5 hour cut of the film on iTunes. Apple financed this film, so the cut that's released is done not bad in box office the first weekend. Is the cut down version, it's 2.5 hours. The problem here is, I don't know what the 4-hour version is, if it puts back a lot of the stuff I'm criticising of. Why is this not in the film? Because there's so much is missing. Now, Ridley Scott made Kingdom of Heaven, which in its cut down version is one of its worst films. In its extended version, in the original cut, before it was cut down, it's one of his best films. And it was like the cuts just destroyed the film. And I'm not sure this happened here as well. Like, you never want to watch the theatrical cut of Kingdom of Heaven, but you should watch the extended cut, because the extended cut's good. So I'm not sure if this happened here, but this film is obviously missing so many scenes. Not just of things that you should be in historically, but just pace-wise. It just jumps and jumps and jumps, and people appear and disappear, and it's like, what happened to his brother? What happened to some of his advisors who seemed really important and suddenly gone? And it's like there's so many scenes missing. And even like Waterloo feels a bit rushed. It's well done, but it's not even remotely as good as the Battle in Waterloo and the film Waterloo. Even though Rupert Everett's a really good Wellington, really bitter and pissed off, and he's really good. It's like you could watch a film about him and it'd be fascinating, but you don't get that much of him. Instead, it's the love story, and it's like the tackiest, most boring thing possible to do with Napoleon is love story, and that's where they go with. And it's like, it's interesting to see a dysfunctional couple, but there are other things in Napoleon that's more fascinating. And it just becomes embarrassing to watch. It's like, it's just like they've not come to grips with the subject matter. They've not figured out the subject matter. Kubrick wanted to make Napoleon for years. He'd done all this research. Obviously, his film would have been much more analytical about who he was, what he was, how he was a great person for organising things and for planning and for making sure the troops are fed as they're going into Russia and things like that. All of that stuff you don't get here. You don't get the intellect of Napoleon at all. All you do is get the horny little old boy. Napoleon is just not. It's not really appropriate for the subject. It's like you're taking someone and looking only at the flaws rather than what the flaws, what the strengths, and you get a kind of idea of a person. So I'm hoping in the longer version we get some of the other stuff, the important stuff that, like the revolution is really important and how that passed out over time, because there were so many different corrupt governments before Napoleon took power, and the corruption of those different governments led to Napoleon, because he couldn't have risen if they hadn't screwed up so badly in the post-revolutionary landscape. It could not have happened. And if it weren't so dysfunctional and so easily manipulated by Napoleon, he couldn't have done some of these wars and some of these advances and become the emperor. It's like there's so much there that is not actually delivered upon in this film. There's so much that's interesting about Napoleon that's just not in film. So that's why it's what the hell is this? It's like, how can you make a Napoleon film without Trafalgar, without Spain, without Italy? You know, without all those battles in the middle of Europe where it's going back and forward, and there's all these issues with with Austria and things like that. Instead, just focus on his need for an heir and his relationship with his wife. It's like kind of missing the point of a Napoleon film. So yeah, this one is wait for the iTunes version. Hopefully that'll be better, because I think if you go and see this one, you'll be thinking, what am I watching? Well, why am I missing so much of the obvious subject matter to be covered? So yeah, I mean, it's also weird because, I mean, a lot of people think that the marriage was a marriage of convenience for a lot of the time. So it might not even be that historically accurate, this version of the film. There's a lot of stuff that's not historically accurate. Napoleon did not shoot at the pyramids. He really didn't. So, yeah. What the hell is this? Wait for iTunes version. Don't do anything don't do this yourself and go and see this film. I mean, the embarrassing thing is, if you watch the interviews, Ridley Scott's been a pain, he's been arrogant, and it's like, people's expectations have been heightened because of Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, whether you like it or not, actually put the work in to make a complicated figure, a complicated history, understandable to people like almost 100 years later, or 80 years really. He put the work in to make that understandable. And people appreciated it, made a lot of money and a lot of respect. because it was a difficult subject matter and he really, really did the job. So if you have a film that then comes along and is another historical epic and it's just half-assed with it, and it's like, was the writer on the beach for most of this film just sunning himself? Of course people are going to point out there's a problem. Of course they are. Why wouldn't they? So that's the thing, is it came out after Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer kind of showed how you're meant to do this kind of thing. So it's like one of the better versions of how you do it, and then one of the worst versions of how you do it, all in 1 year. Of course it's going to show up. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I won't rant any longer. I would just start repeat myself. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back soon with some more. Bye.